In the heart of the vast desert, there lived a young camel named Samir. Samir loved his home, but the desert was a challenging place to live. The sun was scorching, and the sand stretched endlessly. Samir often wondered how creatures like him managed to survive in such an extreme environment. One day, while walking through the dunes, Samir met an old, wise camel named Zaid. Samir asked him, "Zaid, how do you live in this desert? It's so hot and dry. Doesn't it get difficult?" Zaid smiled and nodded. "It does get difficult sometimes, but life in the desert teaches us an important lesson: how to adapt." Samir didn't understand. Adapt? What does that mean? Zaid explained, "To adapt means to change and adjust to your surroundings. The desert can be harsh, but those who learn to adapt can survive and even thrive here." Zaid pointed to his large, strong legs and said, "My legs help me travel long distances in search of food and water. They are built to handle the hot sand and the harsh desert heat. I have learned to pace myself and not rush, so I don't get too tired." Samir thought about how he often rushed across the desert, feeling frustrated by the heat. "But what about the water?" he asked. "The desert doesn't have much water, does it?" Zaid nodded again. "The desert doesn't give us water easily, but we have learned to conserve it. Our bodies are designed to store water in our humps, so we don't need to drink often. We've adapted to survive in this dry land." As Samir listened, he began to understand. So, adapting means finding ways to use what we have and not trying to fight against the desert? Zaid smiled and said, "Exactly. Life here is not easy, but it's all about adjusting and making the best of what we have." The next day, Samir decided to try adapting in his own way. He moved more slowly through the desert, paying attention to his surroundings. He found shade when the sun was hottest and only walked when the temperature was cooler. Samir also started to notice the small things around him. He saw how the desert plants had learned to store water in their roots, and how the animals were able to find food in the smallest of places. He realized that every creature in the desert had found its own way to adapt. Over time, Samir became more comfortable in the desert. He learned to listen to his body, to adjust his pace, and to take advantage of the resources the desert offered. He no longer fought against the heat or the dry air. Instead, he learned to embrace the desert's challenges. One day, after a long journey, Samir returned to Zaid and said, "Thank you for teaching me how to adapt. I used to think the desert was impossible to live in, but now I understand. It's all about knowing how to adjust and making the most of what we have." Zaid nodded proudly. "You've learned well, Samir. The desert, like life, can be challenging. But if you adapt to its changes and learn from each experience, you can thrive." From that day on, Samir felt at peace in the desert. He had learned that adapting to the changing environment made life more manageable and even beautiful. He knew that, no matter where life took him, he could always adjust and find his way.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more magical stories that inspire and teach life lessons.